The Bible this evening, let's turn to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. And I want us to imagine living in a place like California that's known for its forest fires. And so imagine one night you wake up in the middle of the night to a call from the fire department, and they're telling you that everyone in your neighborhood is being forced to evacuate your homes because of the danger of this nearby fire that's making its way toward your neighborhood, toward your home. And they tell you, basically, you have 2 hours to pack everything that you want to save, any of your earthly belongings that you want to keep, to pack those into the trunk of your car, and then you have to leave. You have to abandon everything else that you own. Now, all of a sudden, with that news, as you're looking around the house at all the things that you've accumulated through the years, you have to decide, okay, what do I really need? What can I not do without? What really matters? Because this is all I can take with me. Several years ago, our nation went through a recession, and a lot of us complained. But the reality is that God uses things like a recession or a financial hardship to show us who we're really trusting in, to help us refocus our priorities and see whether or not we're seeking His kingdom first. It gives us an opportunity to ask ourselves, am I really storing up treasure in heaven, or have I been storing up my treasure in the New York Stock Exchange? Because now I just lost a lot of it, or maybe all of it. Rather than investing in spiritual priorities and receiving 100-fold return, as Jesus promises, as well as eternal dividends. And here in Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells a similar story to that, the parable of the rich fool. And he warns, down in verse 15, Luke 12, verse 15, he says, "Take heed and beware of covetousness." I mean, what an incredibly popular sin in our culture today. We have a whole advertising industry that tries to create this sin of covetousness. "For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth." Now that statement is very countercultural. Our culture says that your life, your worth consists entirely in the things that you possess, in the abundance of your possessions. Verse 16, "And Jesus spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully." Now there's nothing wrong with that. We know that in the Bible it's not wrong to be rich, that there were godly men like Abraham and Job who were godly and who were also rich. So that's not a bad thing. We know that when the ground brings forth plentifully, that's not only a good thing, that's a God thing. That we can sow and we can water, but who brings the increase? God does. So for this man to be rich is perfectly fine. For him to have a bumper crop that the ground is bringing forth plentifully is perfectly fine. But notice in the next verse, we see this man needs to visit the optometrist because he has an eye problem. Verse 17, "And he thought within himself, saying," this is this rich farmer who's just had a bumper crop. He says, "What shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits." And he said, "This will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods." So where is his focus? His focus is on himself, on how he's going to use his wealth to be rich toward himself rather than to be rich toward God. Listen to this boast that he makes in verse 19. He says, "And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee." You see, one day or one night, your soul will be required of you. And your soul will leave your physical body, will leave your physical house, will leave your physical possessions to go to heaven or to hell for all eternity. And that is very serious. The destination matters, but you know what doesn't matter? The luggage, your stuff. You're not going to have even 2 hours to try to pack your most prized belongings. You're not even going to have the back of your pickup truck or the trunk of your car to pack what you're going to take with you into eternity. You won't take any of it with you. And so why work so hard through life? Why worry so hard about laying up treasure that won't go with you? The end of verse 20 says that then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? All the stuff, all the material possessions that you work so hard to provide, you don't even know what will happen to it. You don't even know to whom it will one day belong. You say, well, my kids will get it. Well, what if they lose it? Or even if they don't lose it, what will happen to them? Because one day, their soul will be required of them. You say, well, they'll leave it to someone who will leave it to someone who by that time it's almost guaranteed you won't know who that person is. You see, our treasure is just a gift that's given to us by God. It's His, that we get to steward for a little bit of time. Our money is like a tool that God gives us to use for a window of time, for an assignment that He gives to us to accomplish with that tool. And one day, we'll lay down that tool for someone else to pick up. And so the question is, will you lay up treasure for yourself, or will you be rich toward God? Will you waste it, or will you use it for eternal dividends? And this rich farmer is an example of someone who wasted it, who failed, who was a fool. The lesson of Luke 12 is found in verse 21, where Luke records, "So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Like verse 20 said, if that's what you do, if you lay up your treasure for yourself and you're not rich toward God, verse 20 says you're a fool. If you're using all your treasure for yourself rather than being rich toward God. Now, I'm thankful that so many of you are rich toward God, that you are giving generously. And what a blessing it's been even this year so far to see every single month that we are running over budget. And we'll talk about some of those things here in a minute as we get into the business meeting. We are, of course, continuing to aggressively pay down the debt, and Lord willing, if we stay on this pace, we have only about 20 months left until we'll be debt-free as a ministry. And that's a great blessing. And yet at the same time, of course, we have missionaries to support and ministries to fund and facilities to maintain. We're still a church on mission, and so in a few minutes we're going to have a special business meeting about a need that has come up that we want to meet. But before I do, I'd like to share just a little bit of something I shared with the deacons last month, and really some of my vision for Morningside as we move forward. From the year 2000 to 2014, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, Greenville's population has increased by 103,136 people. The upstate during that time has increased by 189,040 people. And if you doubt those statistics, just drive on Woodruff Road during rush hour or at any time, and you'll understand the population in our community is increasing. According to the 2010 census, the median age in Greenville is 35 years, which means at 37, I'm old. I'm an old man in Greenville County. And if we are going to reach our community, then as a church, we want to reflect our community. We want to be a church that's growing. We want to be a church that's getting younger. And so a year and a half ago, when the pulpit committee had first contacted me and were sending me information about the church, they sent a survey of the membership, and they'd broken it down by decades. And this is the membership breakdown back then in 2014. The 20-something decade represented 13% of the membership. Now, these don't all add up because there's some teenagers and children who have joined the church, but 30s, 10%, 40s, 13%, 50s, 12%, 60s, 20%, and 70s, 15%. If you look at those last 2 decades, you'll see those are the 2 biggest decades. So the good news is we have a lot of maturity at Morningside. It reminds me of Ronald Reagan in his debate with Walter Mondale, and they brought up the issue of age. And he said, I want you to know that I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. And that was one of the famous, all-time famous zingers of presidential debates. And it certainly is humorous, but there's also a lot of truth to that. And that's why we value seniors at Morningside. Our seniors are some of the heavy lifters when it comes not just to attendance and praying and ministering, but giving. And so we highly value those in the 60s and 70s and 80 and above, 80 years young and up. And yet, at the same time, the pulpit committee, the deacons, and I think we all see that if we are going to be a church that is multi-generational, that we want to see those percentages, and we want to see the numbers especially going up as well in those younger decades. If anything, you don't want to be heavily weighted to any generation, but you certainly don't want to be too heavily weighted to the younger generation. This is something that we found out in Indiana, the church that I was at, in our Christian school, is that if we could see our student body look more like a pyramid with a huge preschool and a huge kindergarten feeding into the school, we could predict growth every year going up. And it was amazing to see how in 2 years our school enrollment doubled and our student body was growing at this rapid rate of speed. So on the one hand, we certainly want every generation to be well represented at Morningside, but we especially want to focus on how do we reach the younger generation. We recognize today is our promotion Sunday and Sunday school at Morningside, and we always joked at my church in Indiana that when you got promoted to John Ford's Sunday school class, the only way you could be promoted from there is to be promoted to Jesus' Sunday school class. So there's a sense in which we don't want the pyramid to be inverted. And so that's why, as we talk about this one item that's going to come up tonight in the business meeting, this really plays a role in a much broader vision for the church, and that is that, and this is what I presented to the deacons, that we need to focus on growing our college group, on growing our young singles, our young couples, as a long-term investment. It's interesting because our college group has grown significantly this year. And a lot of it is that we have a unique opportunity here in Greenville with several different colleges that are in the area. It was exciting to see our college group grow to almost 200 students who were coming and worshiping with us on a Sunday morning. It's exciting because we get to put an imprint on their ministry. We get to connect, and this is the focus of the Sunday school class, is connecting these 200 college students with our church planters through Open Door Baptist Missions, and praying and encouraging them to consider, don't just look for a job when you get out of college, but look for a church plant that you can go and be a part of, that you can go and hold up the hands of Greg Wright or Stephen West or Ryan Horkovy or one of our multiple church planters across the country. We're excited as a church that has a large college Sunday school class, college ministry, as well as our own Open Door Baptist Missions, to say, how can we connect some of these students to our mission board? And how can we see these young people becoming open door missionaries and taking the gospel to the ends of the earth? And even if nothing else, that we have an opportunity for 4 years to make an impact and put a spiritual imprint on these young people who will hopefully go help local churches all across our country as they graduate and they move on from Greenville. On the other hand, there is somewhat of an ulterior, selfish motive, and that is that we know that many of these young people will stay in Greenville. And we want them, if they do stay in Greenville, to consider staying at Morningside, being part of our career class, getting married at Morningside, becoming future Morningsiders. So that is the long-term investment that we're looking at, and you say, well, yeah, but is there a short-term payoff? I know that long-term investing is good, to wait for those dividends, but what's the short-term payoff? And there are actually several things. Number one is what I would call optics. That there's a big difference between when you visit a church for the very first time, coming into an almost empty auditorium or somewhat empty auditorium versus a full auditorium. There's something electric and dynamic about that. There's something exciting about that. Also, when you go into a new church and you look around, if you don't see anyone your age, you start to get concerned. Again, when Carrie and I were on vacation last week and found a Bible-believing Baptist church that we could go and attend, when we walked in, we realized we were about the youngest people in the church, except for the pastor and his wife, who immediately came up to us and were a little disappointed when they found out that we were just visiting. But again, they said, it's just good to have another young couple in the church and some kids in the nursery. And so there's something exciting when you come into a church and you see that the median age in our auditorium has dropped significantly when you add 200 college students on a Sunday morning. There's also the energy that it brings in staffing many of our ministries, and it was exciting to see dozens and dozens of college students who became involved in our music ministry, in our nurseries, in our ushers, our guest services, Kids for Truth, media ministry, and it brings an energy when you have all these ready recruits for different ministries in our church on a Sunday morning. A third way that the college group's growth benefits the church overall is in attracting their parents and attracting other people of all ages. It's an interesting statistic I think I heard recently that most millennials go to college within 80 miles of their home. Part of the reason is because they're not going as far from home as they used to in my generation or maybe your generation. But another reason is that a lot of times the parents are moving to be with their millennials. And we've seen that over the course of this year where multiple families have been moving to Greenville, moving with these millennials. And so that's another reason. It's exciting to see what we saw this morning, where we have people from different generations with the Drapinski family who are joining our church, from the great generation to baby boomers to millennials, all in one fell swoop as a family comes and says, we want to worship God together. We want to be part of the same church family. You say, is this just some harebrained idea that you have, or is this something that has been done? And this, in fact, is something that has been done in multiple churches. There's a very large growing church right now in North Carolina in the Research Triangle that some of my wife's family are now attending, that started with basically a kind of a college group at Duke, and I won't hold that against them, but these Duke students got together, and as their group began to grow, the church began to grow from that. There are a couple friends of mine in town whose churches have grown primarily through this engine of young college students, of millennials getting excited about church, getting involved in their local church, and then their families come, their parents come, and other people are attracted to the church. One of the prime examples that I saw when I was in Indiana was a friend of mine, Pastor Chuck Phelps, came to a very well-established church, Colonial Hills Baptist Church. Actually, Harvey and Alice Jones are from that church. And this church was very well heeled, in a great place financially, but was graying. I had some friends of mine who were there as a young couple, and they said, we felt like we were in the minority. I remember when Pastor Phelps came to the church, he was taking me down a hallway, and he said, I don't know why we do this, but for Sunday school, we combine the age of the husband and the wife. And so you'd see these signs that said 160 years, 170 years. It was a little intimidating. And so looking at that church and seeing what Pastor Phelps did, and one of the things he did is very early on, almost immediately, he brought in a young man who I knew, a friend of mine, Keith Lewis, to come as their college pastor, and he tasked him with basically aggressively reaching out to college students. And so they started these cross-impact chapters at different campuses, college campuses. They started witnessing to other college students and seeing their college group grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And what was interesting is now, I think 4 years later, when Ben Farrell was here preaching in the fall, he was telling me, he said, yeah, I get to be the recipient of Keith's growing college class. He said, because I teach the young couple Sunday school class. And he said, my class is booming. He said, I'm not doing anything, but the class is booming. He said, in the last 2 years, we've had 6 sets of twins born into our young couples class because it's growing so quickly. I remember we had, at the time, Evangelist Pettit come and preach at our church in Indiana. And in the Sunday school hour, he gave basically kind of a state of fundamentalism address. And he talked about the crisis that so many fundamental churches are having in reaching millennials. And he said for so many years we've had youth groups and youth pastors, we've had maybe young couples or dynamic things for the family, but we've really overlooked the singles, the career singles especially. And he said what's interesting is that with millennials, more of them are falling into that category. A lot of them are waiting till they're 28, 29, 30 to get married. And so now we have this whole decade that we're not even going after, we're not even targeting, and they're leaving fundamental churches in droves. He said this is really something that could impact our whole movement, because he said what some people don't realize is there are more millennials than there were baby boomers. This is a huge generation. And if we don't reach millennials, if we don't reach this generation, we're not just going to be able to skip a generation and keep going. We're going to lose our ministries. We're going to lose many of our fundamental churches. And so because of that, we were, that following summer, we'd hired an associate pastor. We were looking to hire another assistant pastor. And we ended up going with a guy that became our college outreach pastor. And he had been very effective in evangelism at Winthrop College, right here in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and then down in Clemson, South Carolina. And so he came in with, again, the task of growing that group of millennials, of college students, and it was exciting to see what the Lord was doing in using that ministry. Again, our goal as a church is to be multicultural, to reflect the different cultural ethnicities in our community so we can reach our community. Our goal as a church is to be multi-generational, to represent all the generations in Greenville so that we can reach Greenville for Christ. That is the mission that we are on, to reach our community with the gospel, and that's going to take being intentional and saying we want to reflect our community with the different generations and the different cultures so that anybody can walk into Morningside and feel welcome and belong here at our church. At this time, I'd like to declare Morningside Baptist Church to be in our one-item business meeting, and according to the Constitution, let me begin us with a word of prayer. Father, I thank you so much for the way you have blessed for now almost 6 decades Morningside Baptist Church. I thank you for the many missionaries who have been sent around the globe. I thank you for the nearly dozen church planters that we have had a part of sending and seeing their ministries growing around the country. Lord, I thank you for your people who have said we want to be rich not toward ourselves, not toward laying up material possessions that one day we'll lose, but we want to be rich toward God. We want to give to a vision greater than ourselves. We want to give for eternal dividends, for your kingdom. Father, I pray that if any of us in this room would really feel like we resonate with the rich, foolish farmer, that we're spending too much of our time and resources hoarding and too little of our time and resources giving for your kingdom, that we would say, I want to be rich toward God. Father, I thank you for a church that has been willing to do that has been willing to make sacrifices to see the kingdom, the work of your kingdom growing around the world. And I pray that we would continue to do that. I pray that we would invest in the lives of the next generation, that we would see many millennials coming not just to our college class, but becoming young singles and young couples and young married couples with families here at Morningside Baptist Church. I thank you for the end being in sight for our debt, and I pray that as that happens and you have new things and greater things for us, as we begin a new chapter of being debt-free as a ministry, that you would give us wisdom, that you would allow us to grow for your honor and for your glory and not for our own. Father, I pray that you give us wisdom even as we go into this one-item business meeting, that you would help everything to be done decently and in order, and that would be done for your glory. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.